Hey, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking to help us multiply engagement and loyalty. I'm Rob Alvarez, a consultant and the founder of Professor Game and a professor of gamification and games-based solutions at IE Business School, EFMD, EBS University, and other places around the world. And before we dive into the interview, if you're struggling with engagement in your business and are looking to find out how to make sure your users stay with you, perhaps you will find our free gamification course useful. Find it for free in the links in the description. Hey engagers, and welcome back to another episode of the Professor Game podcast. And we have Mike with us today. But Mike, we need to know, are you prepared to engage?
Oh yeah, always.
Let's do this. We have Mike Rufail. How do I pronounce that?
It's actually Rufail, but we always just say Rufail to keep it simple. But
Rufail, I'll try to remember that one if possible. And we have Mike Rufail, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Tradeoff. In more than 2 decades as a leader in gaming, he has helped popularize global competitive esports and has previously served as a consultant on video game design, competition, and esports strategy for several major companies. And before joining Tradeoff, he served as the Chief Gaming Officer and co-owner of OpTic Gaming and Chief Executive Officer of Envy Gaming, which he founded in 2007. He's based in Dallas in Texas and is an alumni of the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. So, Mike, is there anything that we should know that we didn't mention on that intro?
I have a 4-month-old baby and a 6-year-old daughter, so I'm also a father and husband to an amazing wife. So
really important, absolutely.
Yes. But those
and
are the
4
two
months
things in my life.
You're
right?
still on the difficult side of the initial difficult sleep and that kind of stuff, right?
Oh no, he's actually just an incredible baby so far. So we've been blessed with that. And but yeah, those are the two sides of my life: career and family. And yeah, that's what you should know.
Cool. So, Mike, can you run us through what does a normal day or week with you look like? We want to be with you on your shoes for a bit and see what that looks like.
Yeah, well, I have children, so I wake up from 6 to 7 in the morning every single morning. And yeah, I mean, if I really had to give you the full day, I usually take my dogs outside, open up the garage doors, get my dogs outside, let them have some time outside in the mornings. And then I live by the calendar. So typically, day right now is checking in. We're in the kind of early phase of our first build of our game. And so I'm typically working a lot more with the designers right now than I am with, the kind of the back end and front end guys. But I immediately just start cherry picking through my email and also our design environment and just start looking at the latest notes and how we can improve and dropping notes in for our designers. So that right now, that's typically how I'm spending my day. And then, just interfacing with our different teams and talking to different groups throughout the day.
Sounds absolutely amazing. Sounds very exciting because you're at the start of all this. You've had the experience to do this in other different ventures in the past. So it sounds like an exciting time, if you ask me. But let's actually dive, again, with all the experience. You also mentioned that you've been a competitive esports gamer as well. All the experience that you have around games, I'm sure there have been times where things have not gone as fantastic as they have resulted in the end. And, it's one of those times where you feel it's sort of the end, but then you realize it's not. So a fail moment, a first attempt in learning, especially when it has to do with, game design, or you mentioned in the pre-interview chat, we were talking about how, it's using gamification for something that's typically not been gamified before. Again, we want to be there in that story because we want to take away some of the lessons that you took to maybe save us from some grief in the future.
There's one story specifically. I was young when I first I got hired in by Activision Blizzard to work on Call of Duty as an esports advisor and designer of features in the game. And it was my first real kind of AAA game job, going into work as a designer. And I walked in to a conference room on, maybe my third day, and all of the department heads from Treyarch Studios were in there. I was specifically working with Treyarch Studios, and everybody was kind of chiming in ideas about esports for all the department heads or in the studio. And somebody, the game design director who I reported to, David Vonderhaar, who's a masterclass game designer, is just amazing for Call of Duty, asked me, Mike, what do you think about that? And it was an idea that, I think one of the audio guys was coming up with when we were discussing footsteps when you're running in Call of Duty. And he said, why don't you think that's a good idea? And I said, I just think it's a stupid idea. I just kind of said what my heart was feeling. And then I got drug outside and he said, don't you ever say that an idea is stupid in that room with my department heads. He's like, don't ever say that. He's just like that if you ever do that again, I'm really going to get onto you. And I'm like, okay, I'm sorry. I learned, that day. And so basically the story is, I was young and a little bit ignorant, because I didn't have experience, but now, my approach now based off of that is every idea should be brought to the table. I mean, I now with all the experience I have, there are no bad or stupid ideas, right? they really don't exist in game design. All the ideas, the more ideas that you bring to the table, the better off you're going to be when you produce a game, period. And yes, you will whittle out some ideas that aren't going to fit your game. But even the most ridiculous sounding ideas have made good games, and from what I've seen, right? So that's how some of the groundbreaking games get made, is that the most ridiculous ideas actually get made. So anyway, I just thought that was a story that people can learn from. I still look at it as a major failure, because I also, from a character standpoint, not knowing someone and calling their idea stupid is not. It's just not. It doesn't belong in a game studio. So
it's a lesson learned. I mean, you had to go through that to take it to heart, which seems to be the case, right? That you took that to heart, and now you see it differently. And there's even methodologies for this kind of thing, like nowadays with Lego series play. Precisely the idea and objective is for all the ideas to come to the table, so they can be discussed and they can at least be brought up. And so I totally get it. It's sometimes they ask you and you say, well, yeah, this is what I think, right? But depending on what role you're playing and what's the situation, maybe it was not the best place to call out the idea, maybe to analyze it later. Maybe it went through, maybe it didn't. I don't know. We don't need to know about that.
I think my exact words were like, that would be stupid. It would be because that would be stupid. That's what I said. Is it why wouldn't you do that? Because that would be stupid. Yeah, I guess, but you're
discouraging. Like, I think the main thing is you're discouraging ideas from a team, right? Or even yourself. Right. If you start saying your ideas are stupid, you're discouraging your
tone
ideas.
Matters. Your tone matters, and the way you address someone's idea matters. In just creating a good team environment, also. So totally,
completely agree. So. Again, maybe you had to just go through that to be able to take this to heart, as you did.
Yeah. So I learned. That afternoon, and I never, said something like that again. Seriously, yeah, really, yeah. I really did.
Good stuff. So actually, let's flip that around. How about a time where things actually did go well? What were some of the lessons learned? Some of the success factors that you can name from that experience? We want to be there with you as we were sitting in that conference room with you, listening to you saying that, and maybe cringing a little bit and saying, "Oh, but we totally get what happened there, and we want to be there with you again."
Yeah. So when it comes to Tradeoff, the project I'm working on now, I think experience, is one of the things that has given me has created an opportunity for me to do well. Okay, experience and repetition. I was a professional gamer. I played Call of Duty more than maybe just a few people in the world at the time when I was competing. I was playing the game probably more than pretty much the rest of the world. It was my job to play the game. So, getting the repetition in is how I learned to be better as a professional gamer. And I think I learned that early on, that the more you do something, you can hear somebody say it to you. The more you do something, the better you're going to be at it, right? And if you want to be good at something, you have to do it over, you have to do it over and over again. Right. But people don't really take that to heart and don't think about that enough, in my opinion. And that goes for everything in our lives that you want to be good at. So, or most things, you can apply repetition to it. And the more you do it, the better you're going to be at it. The more time you spend on it, the better you'll be at it. So what happened was I started trading and investing in the markets. Like just, I was always competitive, but I was always like a data numbers guy and always liked to look at the numbers. And so the stock market I was attracted to and started trading, investing, and I found it incredibly difficult in my first couple of years doing it. And I knew that it was one of those things that I could get good at it. I could tell that it was something I could get good at, or at least that's how I felt, if I just continued to repeat and experience it, right? The problem is you're risking real money, right? When in the stock and crypto markets, if you're trading them, or any market, for example, you're risking value. So that's I saw that opportunity as, wow, like there's no way to really do this and learn it unless you have a bunch of capital, right? So how can I
and ruin a significant part of it, right?
Right. Yes. Right. You have to hold on to that capital, and eventually, like 90%, we're seeing over 90% fail rate with day traders. Okay, that's a real statistic put out by FINRA. And if day traders are losing, I believe it was put out by FINRA. Don't quote me on that, but it's pretty widely known that 90% of day traders are losing money, right? And so, the reason that is because there's no way to really recover after you lose kind of all your money, right? You can't really just get back into it and start that repetition. And so I wanted to change that. And I still, that's why I want to get Tradeoff up and running in a way that, what we want to do is create a trading simulator where you're incentivized to win prizes, and that incentivization is your risk. Your risk is now not losing all your money, it's not winning. And that's still enough risk to get people to continue to try and repeat, and you can test your strategies in a real-time marketplace, right? So what our game does is we're a simulator that uses fake money, basically simulated dollars, fantasy money, and we enter you into fantasy games where you're competing against other traders and users, and you all start with the same amount of cash balance of fantasy money, and you trade the real-time markets just as if you were trading a real brokerage or investment account. You're not, and you're trading fantasy money, but the results are the same as if you were, right? $100,000 number on my brokerage account could be the same on my game, right? So we put that number there. You have $100,000, is what we kind of set our opening balance at. You trade it against other, in the markets, and then your balance, your performance is what rates you against other players, right? And so basically at the end of a tournament or at the end of a match, a 1v1 match, whoever has the highest balance wins, right? And then the data that comes off of that, we pull all that trade data, and we can actually kind of show you, where you went right and wrong in our graphs and visualizations. And you get this big access to the data of all your trades on our platform versus other users. And so you can actually compare yourself to other users who do well. You can follow those other users and check out their profile and see what they're doing and their strategies. We're creating a place where people can learn to trade and compete for prize money and prizes. And it's a game of skill. Right? We're operating as a game of skill. And so that's what Tradeoff is. And that's kind of where I think my success is discovering that this repetition can help people.
You found a place where, it wasn't safe essentially to do repetition, right? Which is trading, because you could lose all your money, and you found a way to make it safe essentially so that people could learn the skill. Essentially,
that's right.
Because trading is a skill. Again, you can still lose. Still, 90% of people are going to lose all their money. Maybe we managed to take it down to 85%. Still, most people.
That's right. Right. You said the number, right? I've always said to our partners, and as we're raising money for Tradeoff, potential investors, like if we can just change that number from 90 to 85%, I mean, the amount of difference that makes for that 5% of people in terms of their just financial independence is massive. I mean, it's massive. So that's it. That's the number. Like if we can just convert 5% to being
that's duplicating the success. That's 50% more success.
Exactly. Yeah. And imagine what that does financially, right?
But it's a numbers game, right? It's the way you frame it. If they say you increase 50% success, totally. And it works. It works for 50% more people. I completely agree. Still, the failure rate is still 85%, which is
incredibly high. But
it's
over
part
time,
of the,
I hope to chip away at that, right?
Yeah. But it's part of the way the system works. Like it's,
right.
trading works that way.
Yeah, that's right. And people won't do it just to try. There are people who it's called paper trading right now, right? People will go on platforms, and there are platforms out there you can go paper trade on, but there's no incentive, right? Other than just being able to see what you're doing and learn from that repetition. But there's not enough incentive to get the average person to spend a lot of time on that, right? But when you can win something, right, and it's an environment on a platform that looks good and feels good, like the user experience is good. That's what I hope for, is to create that platform where people can go and they're incentivized and they feel like they're spending their time doing something fun that they're also learning from.
Cool. So, Mike, if you're, maybe in the future you find a different project that you might want to gamify besides Tradeoff, or somebody comes to you and says, "Look, I see you did this with Tradeoff. I'd want to do it with this other thing." Is there a process for the game design part or the gamification part that you would perhaps explain? Do you have some steps? I don't know. Like, how would you come up with that? Is there a mental process that you follow here?
I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot more working on Tradeoff too. And so one of the things I would say recently is that I've had just one of my colleagues working with me, that Mark Buser is his name, and he really opened my world to this. Mark is was a former rocket engineer, turned into a game designer. And, in terms of steps, we operate a little bit loose, to be quite honest. We're such a startup right now that, things are fairly loose, but yeah, planning is important. Creating some bit of a plan is very important. And then, and to get into specifics, I think when a lot of the discussion we've been having and the realizations that we've been having is a lot of games don't spend time on what we call business intelligence, okay, or game intelligence, user intelligence, right? But we call it business intelligence, right? If you want to create a business out of a game, which most people create, games to be somewhat of a business in some way. Just having all the data and the mechanisms to absorb that data on what's making the game sticky, like having a dashboard of all your data to understand where your users are having issues with your game, right? I think that is one thing that I think is going to be more prominent in the future, and basically just creating systems in your game that give you intelligence on your users and players. And that will allow you to ultimately be better for your players and your users. And, that's something we're focused on, obviously, with Tradeoff, and how we're gamifying the stock and crypto market and creating fantasy games around that. We are absorbing a ton of data. It's, what our users are doing in the markets, to all the way down to like, are they leaving our platform because they can't figure something out, right? Along the journey of using like a chart, and the stock chart and things like that. So, we had a big focus on that. And so, and continue to have a big focus on kind of user and business intelligence.
Very, very good practice that you have there. I think it's significant that, once you've decided that whatever you're doing is in the direction of becoming a business, you have to, especially in game design, I think in general, it's easy to keep that sort of off your mind and say, no, well, we'll build a game that works and it's fine and everything's good. And then we'll see how we monetize, which might work. I mean, don't get me wrong. Sometimes that's the way to go, but it depends on what you're doing. There has to be a way in which you're, at the very least, as you were saying, you're collecting data on how people are, how it's being sticky or not, like what's working in the platform, what's not, because then is where you can, whether it's monetization, sponsored, like whatever it is that you're going to do, you have the available information to be able to do whatever comes next. Without it, you just wouldn't be able to do it, no matter how fun the game can be.
Yeah, I mean, that's it, right? It's first of all, it's hard to create a good game. Okay, it is. It's difficult.
Hard enough already.
Yeah, right. It's difficult to create a good game, and then if you do manage to create a good game, and when I say good game, I mean a game that a lot of people like to play, right? Okay, so when you create a good game that a lot of people like to play, how do you make it better, right? How do you continue to engage those users, right? There has to be, if you want to continually have user growth or just even maintain your level of users, you always have to create that engagement. And Mark Buser, I just mentioned, he calls it dopamine. How do we create dopamine, right? How do we create happiness for our users? And if you don't have intelligence, then it becomes much more difficult to identify the little simple things that actually can make things better for your users. So, like I said, even down to like if just some function of your platform, or your game, it's like a kind of a dead end, or just like it's like a difficult place for users to kind of maneuver around. They get frustrated and they bounce, right, and they leave, and log off or just leave. So, I think a big focus on that in the future is what you'll start to see more engineering around understanding where your users are having their issues.
Cool. And Mike,
or what's best for them, right? Like what is the most engaging thing for them, and doing more of that, right?
What's working, what's not working, essentially.
Yeah.
And that
do
sounds
more of what's
very
working
simple.
and fix what's not working, right?
Yeah. And Mike, you've heard, some of the questions, sort of the vibe of the podcast at this point. Is there somebody that you would be curious to listen to answering these questions, sort of a featured guest for the podcast? Somebody come to mind?
Oh man. Gosh, that's a really hard question. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm a big fan of what, like I've had the pleasure of meeting some of the people from Valve, and I think I would love to hear some more. Yeah, the game studio. Yeah, but Valve, they have Steam also, right? So like, I feel like they've done just so many things right. I'm a big fan of just what Valve has done, not just in their own games, but also just with the Steam platform. And I would love to hear like a bit about more about how some of the features came to be in Steam, and just hear somebody answer questions that you're asking me. So I don't know if it's Gaben himself, or just really probably one of the more of like the whoever's in charge of designing and developing the Steam platform is probably who I want to hear from.
Steam is just ridiculous. It's so huge.
I think they were just so far ahead in their way of thinking of like games marketplaces and what they can even do for gamers, inside their own ecosystem, and just like with the games marketplace. I mean, I just think that's what they've done is incredible. I just don't think it's even talked enough in our industry. It's probably talked a lot about, but at the end of the day, it deserves more, in my opinion.
Totally love that. So somebody from Valve, we'll see if there's a specific person would be the best one to answer those things. And keeping up with those recommendations, you've had an extensive career in different things around gaming, game design, and so on. Is there maybe a book that you would recommend, and which book would that be, and why would that be interesting for an audience like this one?
Yeah, honestly, while books might be great, I mean, I think my preference is always like I use Reddit, and I know it sounds a lot of people do and a lot of people don't, but I like to just read real people's comments and stories, whether it be in game design. There's like a Reddit that's just games, like it's the subreddit's games, like, just going in and reading what people have to say or just posts about games. I spend all my time doing that, really, in terms of like the academics of game design, and reading through kind of, maybe books about experiences or whatever. I don't tend to do too much of that, as opposed to I really just dive into communities, and read a lot about what people are doing in indie game design, to just what players are thinking, right? And a lot of that, I just go into a lot of the game subreddits too, and just read what's happening from time to time in all these different games I'm interested in. And so I don't know, I really recommend doing that, because you're really just farming intelligence, right? Like on, eventually if you read enough, you can understand, what's preferred and what's not from a popular standpoint, and yeah, I think I recommend people doing that, just like really learning from other people that are just posting on the internet.
Cool. So things like Reddit and others. Absolutely. Love it. Mike, in this world of game design, gaming, and all the things that you've done, what would you say is your superpower? That thing that you do at least better than most other people in the world? Besides Call of Duty, of course.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, a lot of what, comes from my background is just building teams of people, building teams of people and helping those. I think my superpower is really giving people an environment where they can realize their full potential. That's what I've built my career on, whether it was, signing the best pro gamers from all over the world to compete on my teams to go win a world championship. That's our goal, right? So I want to sign the best players that I can put together on one team that can go out and win a world championship together. And, there's a chemistry to that. The best player in the world, in the game like Call of Duty or Counter-Strike or League of Legends might be the best player of the world with his current teammates, but you put him on another team and he's no longer the best player in the world. And so that chemistry really matters. And so I think my superpower was was basically creating an environment where people could realize their full potential, and then being a chemist with the composition of players on my team. And I take that into business also. So, putting people together that can achieve a goal with that have the right environment and chemistry.
Cool. Putting the right team together, essentially.
Yeah, team building
chemistry
in a short answer. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm trying to summarize it, but it's all of those things that you were saying. Totally. Good one. And maybe a difficult one here, finally, because the ones that you've been sort of breezing by, so much, experience that you had. But what would you say, Mike, if I asked you, what is your favorite game?
That's impossible. How do people answer that? Right? I don't even understand how people answer. I mean, my favorite game franchise of all time is something I'm just rekindling my love with right now, which is Diablo. I'm just a big fan of the Diablo series. But man, it's not. I mean, I played a ton of games, throughout my life, and I have a lot that are, that are a lot of fun to me. I really enjoyed playing StarCraft. I mean, there's so many. They're really. Yeah. I played Magic the Gathering, since I was a kid, young kid, and so I still have my collection somewhere over here on the shelf, and I loved, playing collectible card games like that. But yeah, I mean, it dates all the way back to when I was a child too, right? Like a lifetime of playing video games and other games. So yeah, I would say Diablo right now is the one I'm spending the most time on. Yeah. Sounds good.
People end up going sort of around like, well, currently or historically. It makes sense, right? Because most of the people we interview here have a strong passion for games as well in one way or another. And it's really hard to choose. The other day, trying to remember where it was that they asked me the question, and I always sort of avoid answering because it's a question for the podcast, right? But it is a tough one for sure. It's intentionally tough. I think it brings up good stuff, and people have to sort of sit down and make some reflection points on what has been their lives as a gamer, where they are at right now. It's always, I don't know, it brings up I would like to argue that if I were better at being a psychologist or something like that, I'm sure that I could bring up some traits from people just from answering that question and some of the podcasts. But it's not my specialty, so all good. Mike, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. Is there anything else you want to share? Any place you want to lead us to? Call to action? Anything? This is the right moment before we finish, essentially.
Yeah. So, just if anybody's listening and wants to look into Tradeoff more, we're on X or Twitter at Play Tradeoff. We're just getting started, as a startup, but our first tests are, kind of test tournaments and games will start running in November of 2024, this coming month, and then we should have something like a public alpha launch sometime before the end of the year. And so would love for you all to jump in and play some games, learn to trade and invest if you haven't learned already. And if you are looking to just sharpen your skills and compete, then we're the place for you too. So yeah, just follow us online. You can also visit our landing page for now at tradeoff.com.
Sounds fantastic. And thanks again, Mike, for sharing your experience, your expertise, everything that you've been doing. Well, what you were able to share in these scarce almost 30 minutes. However, Mike and Engagers, as you know, at least for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over.
Hey, Engagers, and thank you for listening to the Professor Game podcast. And since you are into gamification and game-inspired solutions, how about you go into the free gamification course that we have for you? Just go to professorgame.com/free gamification course, all one word, professorgame.com/free gamification course, and get started today for free. After that, we will also be in contact and you will be the first to know of any opportunities that Professor Game might have for you. And remember, before you go on to your next mission, before you click continue, please remember to subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.